It was a summer night, and the sky was dotted with bright stars as a full moon cast a silvery light over the dense forest. A group of 5 friends, eager for an exciting adventure, decided to spend the weekend camping deep in this isolated forest. The friends were Emily, the leader of the group, a brave and adventurous young woman; Mike, her boyfriend, an athletic and nature-loving boy; Sarah, Emily's best friend, a witty, star-worshipping girl; Mark, the camping expert, who always came prepared with state-of-the-art equipment; and Lisa, a calm and artistic friend who sought inspiration in the beauty of nature. They arrived at the clearing chosen to pitch their tents, where a fire crackled happily. With laughter and stories, they set up their tents and shared the excitement of spending a weekend away from the city. Emily and Mark began building a circle of stones for the fire, while Sarah and Lisa placed their sleeping bags inside the tents. Mike took on the task of lighting the fire, excited to show off his survival skills. As the campfire came to life, the group settled around it, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. The warmth of the bonfire and the twinkling of the stars soothed their hearts and warmed their souls. The night wore on, and the surrounding forest seemed to come alive with the sounds of nature. The wind in the leaves of the trees whispered secrets, and the distant cry of an owl echoed in the night. The moon cast mysterious shadows on the trees, creating a magical and somewhat frightening atmosphere. They talked about local legends of hauntings and forest mysteries, but everyone laughed and dismissed the stories as superstition. Emily picked up her guitar and began to play a soft melody, while Lisa began to draw the night scenery in her art notebook. As the night wore on and the friends settled into their tents, the fire slowly dwindled, casting shadows that danced on the tent walls. The group shared hushed laughter and friendly whispers before finally giving in to their exhaustion and falling asleep. However, Emily couldn't find sleep. She felt restless, as if something was wrong. She could hear the sounds of the forest outside the tent, but something that night seemed different. A sense of presence haunted her, as if invisible eyes were watching her. Emily tried to convince herself that she was just nervous about being in an unfamiliar environment, but the feeling of unease persisted. She looked at the clock and saw that it was already past midnight. He couldn't understand why he couldn't sleep like his friends. A cold wind began to blow through the forest, causing the leaves on the trees to rustle in an ominous manner. The fire had completely gone out, leaving the camp in total darkness. Emily could tell something was very wrong, but she couldn't put her finger on it. She decided to leave the tent to investigate, but before leaving, she looked at her friends who were still sleeping peacefully. Carefully, she unzipped the tent and found herself in a silent, dark night, where only the moon's glow lit the way. The air was thick with a strange energy, and the night sounds of the forest had completely disappeared. Emily felt a chill run down her spine as she ventured into the darkness. She was determined to find out what was happening that scary night in the forest. Emily walked silently through the dark forest, with only the moonlight as a guide. Every step she took seemed to echo in the oppressive silence, and she wondered where the night sounds that had filled the forest before were. The feeling of being watched never left her, and she had the strange impression that the trees were subtly leaning towards her, as if whispering dark secrets. She hugged her coat to her body, feeling the cold air penetrate her bones. Emily looked for traces of her friends, but the darkness made it almost impossible to see beyond a few feet in front of her. She tried to call out to them, but her voice seemed to be lost in the darkness. Time seemed to stretch inexplicably as Emily continued to explore the forest. She finally found something that made her stop abruptly. Strange inscriptions marked on the trees around her. They were unknown symbols, deep carvings into the bark of the trees, as if someone had made them for some sinister purpose. Emily tried to decipher the symbols, but they were so strange and ancient that she couldn't understand their meaning. Just looking at them filled her with a feeling of deep unease. Continuing her search, Emily suddenly noticed a narrow path leading away from the main path. There was something strange and magnetic about that detour, something that pulled her toward it. With a growing sense of urgency, she decided to follow the trail. The trail took her deeper into the forest, and the feeling of being watched intensified. She imagined hearing faint whispers among the trees, as if the forest itself were trying to communicate with her. In a moment of clarity, Emily realized that this was not a natural trail. Someone had built it with purpose and determination. She wondered who could have done this and why. As she walked along the trail, Emily suddenly heard a distant sound, something like a soft moan. She quickened her pace, determined to discover the source of that sound. As he got closer, the wail turned into a lonely, anguished cry. She finally found a small clearing, where a figure was standing with his back to her. The figure appeared to be a woman, dressed in old, worn-out clothes. Her long hair fell in disarray, and she slowly rocked back and forth, emitting that distressing cry. "Are you well?" Emily asked, approaching cautiously. The woman didn't respond, but her crying continued, becoming even more chilling. Emily realized something was terribly wrong, and her instinct told her to get away from there immediately. However, before she could retreat, the woman slowly turned around, revealing a pale face and eyes void of any human emotion. Her lips parted in a sinister smile, and she began to move toward Emily, steps slow and clumsy. Fear gripped Emily, and she turned and ran down the dark path. She heard the woman's footsteps following her, the anguished cries still echoing in her ears. Emily didn't know where she was going, but she knew she needed to escape the unknown threat that was chasing her in the whispering forest. Emily ran down the dark path, her heart beating wildly. The forest around him seemed to come to life, with dancing shadows and eerie whispers filling the air. She didn't dare look back to see if the pale figure was still following her, but she could feel its threatening presence. The trail seemed endless, and Emily wondered how she had gotten lost so deep in the forest. Her friends were still somewhere, perhaps facing the same nightmare that haunted her. She blamed herself for taking the unknown path, but at that moment, there was no room for regret. With each step, the forest seemed to transform. The trees distorted into strange shapes, and the sounds became more and more distorted. Emily felt like she was entering a living nightmare, where reality became fluid and unpredictable. She finally emerged back into the clearing where she had encountered the pale figure. To her relief, the woman was nowhere in sight, but Emily knew she couldn't stop. She kept running, trying to find some familiar landmark that would lead her back to the camp. Time seemed to have lost all meaning, and Emily had no idea how much time had passed since she started running away. The moon still hung high in the sky, but it was now obscured by dark clouds that were rapidly gathering. The darkness of the forest was almost suffocating. Suddenly, Emily heard a sound in the distance. It was a laugh, weak and distorted, as if it came from a different dimension. She followed the laughter, hoping to find her friends, but the sound seemed to move constantly, as if it were running away from her. Finally, Emily arrived at a different clearing, where her friends were standing in a circle with blank expressions on their faces. They were slowly swaying back and forth, emitting sinister laughter that cut through the silence of the night. "Friends!" Emily shouted, running towards them. "What is happening?" But his friends didn't respond. They continued in their strange trance, laughing and swaying. Emily tried touching them, shaking them, and yelling at them, but nothing seemed to snap them out of that state. The laughter that once seemed distant was now in his ears, echoing louder and scarier. Emily turned to face the pale figure, who was standing at the entrance to the clearing. Her lips moved in an unintelligible whisper, and a feeling of terror enveloped her. Desperate, Emily picked up a rock from the ground and threw it towards the figure. The stone passed straight past her, as if the figure were made of smoke. Emily couldn't understand what was happening, but she knew she needed to do something to save her friends. She knelt down next to Mike and tried to wake him up once more, but he remained still. The friends' laughter became increasingly loud and disturbing, as if they were being consumed by a sinister force. Determined to find a solution, Emily looked at the symbols on the trees surrounding the clearing. They were similar to the ones she had encountered before, and she realized they must have some connection to what was happening. But deciphering the meaning of those symbols was an impossible task in that moment of panic. With a heavy heart, Emily made a difficult decision. She knew she couldn't help her friends at that moment, and that she needed to escape that cursed place to seek help. With tears in her eyes, she walked away from the clearing, ignoring the terrifying laughter that chased her as she disappeared into the darkness of the forest. Emily ran desperately through the forest, away from the macabre clearing where her friends were trapped in a sinister state. The disturbing laughter still echoed in her ears, filling her with terror. She didn't know where she was going, but she had to find help before it was too late. The forest seemed to writhe around her, as if it were alive and trying to stop her from escaping. The trees seemed to close the path behind her, creating an insurmountable barrier. Emily was surrounded by darkness and the unknown. The moon, which had previously cast a faint light, was now completely covered by dark clouds. Emily felt like she was in an endless nightmare where reality was bending and twisting. Finally, she found herself in a part of the forest that looked unlike anything she had seen so far. The trees were older and more imposing, and the darkness there was even denser. She saw a shadowy lake in front of her, with a lone tree at the water's edge. Emily ran to the lakeshore and looked around, desperate for any sign of help. It was then that he noticed something strange about the lonely tree. There were more strange inscriptions carved into the bark of the tree, ancient symbols that resembled those he had seen before. Feeling that those inscriptions had some connection to what was happening, Emily tried to decipher their meaning. She didn't know why the symbols were there, but she felt they were the key to solving the nightmare that surrounded her. As she studied the symbols, the water in the lake began to stir, as if something was emerging from the depths. Emily took a step back, her heart racing with fear. To his surprise and horror, a figure slowly emerged from the water, shrouded in shadow. The figure was the same pale woman she had encountered earlier in the clearing. His empty eyes fixed on Emily, and a sinister smile appeared on his lips. It was like she was everywhere, always watching her, always chasing her. "Who are you? What do you want?" Emily asked, her voice shaking. The figure did not respond, but began to move towards Emily, water dripping from its body in an unearthly fashion. Emily was trapped between the tree with the mysterious symbols and the terrifying figure that was approaching. With her breathing rapid and her heart beating wildly, Emily decided to take action. She grabbed a stone from the ground and threw it towards the figure, hitting it squarely. The figure let out a cry of pain and disappeared into the dark waters of the lake. Emily ran back through the forest, determined to escape this nightmare alive. She didn't know how or why this place had become a veritable field of horror, but she was determined to survive. Finally, Emily emerged from the dark and scary forest and found herself on the outskirts of the original camp. She could see the tents in the distance and ran towards them. When he arrived at the camp, he found everything silent. There was no sign of his friends, and the fire was completely out. Emily ran to the stalls and opened them, only to find them empty. Fear and sadness enveloped her as she realized her friends were missing. She had escaped the haunted forest, but at a great cost. What happened to her friends? She never knew. Emily eventually found her way back to civilization and reported what had happened that terrible night. Authorities launched a search for his missing friends, but never found any trace of them. The experience haunted Emily for the rest of her life. She never ventured into that forest again and never discovered what or who was behind the nightmare she experienced. The night at the camp became a dark legend in the region, a horror story that haunted the dreams of everyone who heard it.